Welcome everybody to Salesforce Architect Academy. It's the reboot of Architect Academy. I am Tom Leddy and I am an Architect Evangelist at Salesforce. And Matt, if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm really glad to be here. Well, hey Tom, my name is Matt Parin and I'm one of the product directors for Hyperforce. We are delivering Salesforce running on public cloud infrastructure. And with public cloud infrastructure, we're able to do really unique things that we haven't been able to do before with Salesforce. We've built Hyperforce to be a domain-driven design cloud-native model. And so what you're looking at on the left is essentially an X-ray of the services that we have operating on the Hyperforce platform. And so each of these little circles, these little boxes, these bounded contexts, if you will, are functional domains that exist on the larger functional instance or Hyperforce platform. And so, for example, the large ones are the Salesforce core application functional domain. Now on here, we also have a variety of security functional domains to really ensure that the data you put in and the processing of the data that you ask us to do is secure and protected. We also have our Einstein services FD, which hold things not only our predictive AI, but also our generative AI capabilities. Then we have things like, which we call our foundation FD. Our foundation FD essentially manages the entire operation of the functional instance. And then we have things like Edge FD. So we know that Hyperforce does not exist in a vacuum. It's not in an air gap per se. And so you need to be able to manage connections to outside parts of the internet. And so we leverage our Edge FD. And then finally, the thing I'm most excited about to talk about is we have an entire data cloud FD. And so data cloud, when it communicates with our core FD or even your Einstein services, we are utilizing private connections that are secured with mutual tenant level security to ensure that all the communications are encrypted and secured as they're kind of moving through this platform. And so that kind of gives you a little bit of what we talk about and we think about internally that we're kind of for the first time sharing externally, what this X-ray of Hyperforce actually looks like.
That's really cool. And yeah, hearing about the underlying services and then all the security that you talked about is going to be critical. And in fact, especially for the scenario we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. And just to clarify, so we've got all these functional domains. Would you be able to give the definition of what a functional domain is?
Well, a functional domain, just to be simple, is a collection of services that are designed to work together, right? So search, for example, is a functional domain. So instead of putting search capability within every single other part of this, so search within the data cloud context or search within the core application context, or even search within like a security context, we've put search within a bounded context. So each of those functional domains can call search using a private connection and then be able to leverage that capability, leverage the indices that exist in search without the search team itself having to operate within each of these functional domains separately. One of the important things to think about this from a functional domain perspective, as you're thinking about how we architect Salesforce at Salesforce in a cloud native way, is we really pioneer and are trying to drive a strong service ownership model. And when we deliver services through a service ownership model in functional domains, it allows each of these functional domain representatives, whether it's a data cloud functional domain or a core functional domain or a security functional domain, or even our edge services, they can all make requests of the search team, and then the search team can deliver it once and then have that kind of capability spread across the entire ecosystem. And so this is a standard cloud native pattern that I'm really excited to see us bring forward into the marketplace for enterprise customers as well.
Also to clarify, I know you mentioned that there's a functional domain for data cloud, but data cloud itself is on Hyperforce, right?
Yeah, Data Cloud was previously known as the CDP, Customer Data Platform, and we have recently expanded it to be much more encompassing. And I think this is where I'm really excited to kind of lean into that a little more, because there are a lot of folks on the call who are probably familiar with the Customer Data Platform and what kind of capabilities those offer for segmentation and retargeting in the marketing domain context. But what Data Cloud is doing right now is really moving throughout the enterprise customer, as well as various customers of sizes below enterprises. to really think about how can Salesforce and how can Salesforce services truly support your business and your customers and the growth that you're trying to achieve.
So when I think of data cloud and I think about things like segmentation and even some of the analytics that I want to get from it, maybe that to me seems like almost like a central function. But I know I've worked for organizations that have had multiple Salesforce orgs in different regions. Maybe we see an organization that acquires another organization, and they've got all those different compliance and data residency laws that we were talking about in different regions. So if we've got two orgs and one of them has data cloud that they're using, and then we're adding another org in a different region, what does that all mean for an organization that wants to do something like that?
This is something that I'm very passionate about, right? I want more and more people to be able to use Salesforce in parts of the world that they've never been able to use it before. And I want them to be able to use Salesforce for specific workloads that they've never been able to use Salesforce before. So this is something that is absolutely in line with our expectations. Because right now, technically, you can stream data into Data Cloud from any Salesforce org. Right. But if your orgs are in different parts of the world, if your lines of businesses have different types of rules, you're going to have to think really hard about your organizational policies as well as compliance. And that's where it's really important to kind of take that next step and think about what we are releasing more and more are called these data cloud connectors. Because understanding how a data cloud connector works under the hood is actually the secret to making this multi-org design work for your business.
Let's say we've got just a company of German Trail Outfitters, and let's say that they've recently acquired an organization in South Korea, and we'll call them Solsun, right?
Fitting name.
And they both handle support cases. So if I have an issue, I get a rash when I'm putting on some sunscreen or something like that, right? Now
let's do for Solsun. Let's have them just do, because we got a question from Chris that I think will help make this more clear. So let's have Solsun first do just leads, okay, like sales activities, right, in Salesforce, right? They're a company that first does sales. Because right now, let's assume that Solsun is running on Salesforce in Japan. They're a Korean company, but they're running in Japan right now. How about that?
And are they on Hyperforce?
They're not on Hyperforce yet. Let's make that assumption too. They're currently running on our legacy Salesforce infrastructure in Japan, loving it. They're getting all the capabilities out of Salesforce, and they've been doing it for years.
All right. And now they get acquired by German Trail Outfitters?
Yeah, they got acquired by German Trail Outfitters. They're really excited about this acquisition.
And so now German Trail Outfitters, first thing they're going to do, they're going to have their enterprise architects come in and say, do we need a single org strategy? Do we need multiple? Do we let Solsun keep their org where it is? And one of the factors that you might have to think about is, are there data residency requirements in either one of these locations, right?
Yeah, this is actually the really common scenario that we see Hyperforce become much more relevant for a lot of companies. So there are actually two things that are going to be important for GTO and Solsun when they're thinking through this. And these are all things that matter for your company today. So first off, Solsun, because it's a Korean company, it's going to have the opportunity to be hosted in the Hyperforce location that's now in Korea. We launched it earlier this year. And so instead of being in Japan, they can actually be in Korea. Now, GTO, I think they also have to be thinking about, okay, what is our multi-org design work? I mean, what does that look like, Tom? And now for me, it looks like they're going to be a multi-org design. Does that sound right to you?
It does, yeah, because when we think about it, number one, we have two separate sets of business processes. We're in two different physical locations that may be subject to different regulations. So at least, off the top of my head, as like an enterprise architect, I would say we might want to do two orgs in this scenario.
I think what is really important about this Hyperforce upgrade from the Japan legacy infrastructure to Hyperforce in Korea is this then unlocks a new workload, a new line of business for them to be able to enter into Salesforce, and that is customer case management, right? So we talked about this at TDX, but what's really, really valuable is when you make this upgrade to Hyperforce in a specific part of the world where you want, your organizations can then take on new types of workloads in Salesforce. And I talk about customer case management because in some jurisdictions, cases associated with things like sunscreen, for example, if you get a rash or if something happens to you get a specific type of burn, that can actually be personal health information in some jurisdictions, which then has a different set of controls associated with it. So, for example, Solsun running in Korea or running in Japan may not be able to use customer case management on Salesforce. It's a great capability, we offer it, but because of the compliance regime, they may not be able to use it. But when they move their org to Korea, they then can ensure that that data, that personal health information stays in Korea, and then they can do customer case management in Salesforce instead of having to use another system to actually run those processes to remain compliant. Really interesting use case in terms of value you can get out of this actual upgrade.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we're going to say these are on Hyperforce, and then let's say GTO. We love it so much in Germany. We love what we're doing, so we're going to add it Hyperforce there too. And so let's say that we still want some data from Solsun, and maybe it's at more of an aggregate level, but we want to be able to have like central marketing. We want to be able to have analytics that roll up across the entire organization. Now we can add Data Cloud to this German Trail Outfitters org, right?
Right. And this is like when we were at TDX earlier this year, folks who may have seen our session talked about the idea of like, how do you actually make the compliant connection between these two orgs? And we had some early ideas earlier this year, but now I'm excited to talk a lot about the Data Cloud connectors and what we're able to do with these Data Cloud connectors. Because when we're moving data from an org that's in Korea to an org that's in Germany and ultimately into Data Cloud, what we're doing is being able to take only the data that's appropriate to bring into Data Cloud in Germany to actually run all those things that you want to run in Data Cloud. So you want to run your segmentation. You want to generate your unified customer profile in order to like run your business. So instead of being something that was just theoretical at the time and notional, we now have it, and it's really, really exciting. So I can actually walk through a couple slides to kind of show people what this looks like, if you'd like, Tom.
Yeah, let's do that, and then we'll come back to this diagram in a minute.
When we're bringing data into Data Cloud, it's actually two phases, right? And so there's that data ingestion phase, which I kind of was talking about earlier, but then there's that data modeling piece. So today we're not going to talk about data modeling. You're probably hearing many, many folks talk about what you can do in Data Cloud for data modeling. That is going to be another conversation. But today we're really focused on data ingestion, because that's the point where you have to be really thoughtful as an enterprise architect in terms of how you design and how you deliver this. Now, to get data from a data source, you must first establish a connection between this data source and Data Cloud. So that data source in this context, the conversation we're having, is your Salesforce org that's running in Korea, that Solsun org. As they've upgraded to Hyperforce in Korea, they've added new workloads running in that org, and they're really excited about it. Now, Salesforce offers many out-of-the-box what we call Data Cloud connectors, so you don't actually have to worry about a lot of the pressures of integrating those external systems yourselves. And so once a connector is set up, you create what we call a data stream to ultimately get the data sets from that source org into Data Cloud. And so let's kind of like talk about on the next slide what this looks like. So the data that comes in through a connector is created in a data stream that is then written to a data lake object, or what we call a DLO. Each stream has its own corresponding data lake object. Once the data is written to a DLO, it's refreshed at regular intervals. Different data streams can have different refresh schedules. And for example, right now, data coming in from a Salesforce org is incrementally updated every hour, and then it's fully refreshed every other week. So once you've ingested the data, you move onto the data modeling phase. And this is where you're like looking at how you're taking your data lake objects and mapping them to different objects in the customer 360 data model. I know, Tom, you have lots of experience with data modeling, and I think if you have any points on like recommendations for data modeling, I'd love to hear them, because to me, it just becomes so complex as an enterprise architecture perspective.
I think that, yeah, and when you think of your data model as just kind of the underlying structure of the data that your organization is going to use. So it's all of your objects in Salesforce, it's all of the fields within those objects, and then the way that those objects are related to each other. And it's already important anyway for a variety of reasons. If your data model isn't structured the right way, you're going to have performance and scalability issues, for example. But when it comes to compliance, one of the things that we do have to come back to is, as you're thinking about setting up these connectors, you're going to need to be thinking about what data is actually okay to leave the org that is subject to residency requirements.
Do we want to go back to the diagram and we can talk through those specific steps?
Yeah, let's do that. So what we've got here is we've got our physical connector, and it's basically we're establishing a physical connection between our Solsun org and Data Cloud that's part of our German Trail Outfitters org. And then we're using that connector to send a stream of data across. Now, this stream, let me ask you, this can be basically any data that's in Solsun, right?
GTO will actually create the setup.
Okay.
So that GTO org is going to be the one that says like, okay, I'm going to use Data Cloud and I'm going to use the CRM connector to this Solsun org. So all the control comes from the GTO org's Data Cloud. And so first you're going to go to Data Cloud setup. Once you have Data Cloud setup, then you're going to connect to a new Salesforce org. So
which would be
right now, you create that org and then you authenticate it. Now that's the first step. Then you have that connection between that source org and then that target in Data Cloud.
Okay.
Next step after that is you have to create that data stream. And so the connection has been made, then you do the streaming. And it's when you're creating the stream is where the sensitivity of the data that you're actually bringing into Data Cloud, that's where you control that. So again, this is all German Trail Outfitters. The admin in that group is being able to make these decisions. Now, when creating a stream, there are two different ways you can do it. One are data bundles. Now, we offer a lot of data bundles for objects that are standard as well as custom objects. And then I think what's really awesome is we have a lot of ISV partners who are creating specific bundles. I don't have any news to share on that right now, but ISVs are going to be building more in this space. So be on the lookout for that. But when it comes to this specific compliance use case, I actually say you should be more object specific. Data Cloud shouldn't be your source of record, is your enterprise, right? It should be this ephemeral store that is very use case driven. And so you should bring the data into Data Cloud that you need in order to drive out the specific use case that you want, right? That's why understanding your data model is so important to you being able to do this.
That's a good call too, is yeah, the idea isn't just dump all of the data from this Solsun org into Data Cloud and then just deal with it all once it's there. It is, think about your use cases. What are you trying to do with Data Cloud? And maybe it's marketing, maybe it's analytics, maybe whatever, but what data do you specifically need? And then set up your streams accordingly based on where that data is stored in your org. Yeah. And when the data comes in, you had mentioned the first place it goes is into a data lake object, right?
Yep.
And there's one per stream, I'm believing?
Yeah, there's one per stream that you're setting up. So if you want to, you can pull from the same types of objects, whether they're custom or standard objects, but you're going to be creating one stream per specific use case based on what you're trying to do with that data.
And then from there, within Data Cloud, you map that to a data model object.
Correct.
Which is also called a DMO. And that's what we can then expose within Salesforce. So if we do want some of this Solsun data to show up in the GTO org, we can expose it through a DMO. If we want it to be in analytics, which we'll talk about in a little bit, we can use it to send it over to Tableau. One of the other things is I don't necessarily have to send all of it, right? Like there are filters that we can put in place.
This is the real power of Data Cloud connectors.
Yeah.
How we've designed it is the connector actually is filtering out sensitive data that you deem sensitive at the source. This means that when you create this data stream, that connector is not picking up the data that needs to stay in Solsun, for example. So when you're creating this data stream, you can go into the actual object, and this will be all visualized in your UI, or you can write this in code, and then you can basically pick and choose which elements of that object you want to be brought in with your data stream. So if you want to remove things like lat long information, if you want to remove things like first name, last name, email address, Or if you want to even create a formula field that generates a unique identifier for this person, that is really, really important for us, and something that we're really excited to kind of deliver to people. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of things, and being able to filter at the source is a key piece.
This is a good call out too. And I think one of the things you just talked about that is kind of key is the idea that if I filter something, the data that I'm filtering out never leaves this org, right? If it has to stay in Korea, it's staying in Korea. Whereas as an enterprise architect, right? So I have background here. My initial instinct would be to say, okay, we need a middleware tool, and we need to like send all of our connections. Like we shouldn't even really have this. It should just be sending all of our connections through this third-party middleware tool. I don't know why it's doing that, but I'll take that off. And then, it should be going like that. It sounds like that's not actually what we really want to be doing in this case because of the residency issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of ways to do this, right? A couple of ways to think about this. Middleware is great, especially if you're working with a very large organization or your organization has strong controls. For example, if you're an organization that's running just in the United States and just has lines of business, middleware can be a really useful tool for you to be able to organize that, right? But when you come to operating across maybe political borders, or if you really want to just have much more fine-grained controls and make your audit process maybe a little easier, then maybe you don't want to use the middleware tool. This becomes like a very use case specific design, and I think something where we are actually still learning and thinking about like what makes sense.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It is going to depend on your use case. So if everything is in the US and we're just trying to combine data so we can get aggregates and roll-ups and things, this approach might be great. But the problem here that I would see is, let's say I was using some cloud-based middleware, and that server might not necessarily be located in the same country that our data is in, that we have the data residency requirements, right? So
100%. It just adds more complexity for you, for your auditors, for your compliance teams, and things that could potentially break, right? You're still going to be wanting to use some sort of connector, even if it's into a middleware piece. Like we do have the MuleSoft Anypoint connector for Data Cloud, which is fantastic. And we recommend people to use it if it works for their use case. But at the end of the day, it just goes down to, okay, how many pieces of technology do you want to maintain? How do you want to do audit? How do you want to do compliance? And then for these large organizations that have multiple lines of business, you then get into like, which data should we be flowing in and between these businesses that may not be universally tied together?
If you're thinking about compliance, you want to make sure that the data is being filtered out in the source system before it even makes it into any other system, whether that's a middleware tool or the target system.
In our specific example, the Sun and GTO, I think Sun will feel much better knowing that perhaps sensitive data that they have that they don't want to necessarily share, or the organization says should not be shared with GTO, makes sense, right? They can have a lot of control within their org about which data moves into GTO. So I think this is the biggest idea for us that we've kind of launched is being able to have a lot of that filtering done within the connector itself. Now, I've kind of been like circling on this idea of, hey, you have this organization that was acquired, and then you're like leaning into who has access to certain types of data, both for lines of business as well as compliance purposes. Now, when you do create these connectors, you have to automatically map that data into a specific data space. Now, this is a really interesting innovation that we've done with Data Cloud, is be able to really segment what types of data flows into so-called data spaces, which is data and metadata that exists within Data Cloud that can then be utilized by different types of personas within that Data Cloud, or who has access to that Data Cloud.
It's another thing to think about as you're thinking through your data model and what data you're sending where and everything. Is it's also, once your data gets to Data Cloud, who needs to access it and what do they need to be doing with it? So it's almost the same way that you would think through your security model in just the core Salesforce platform of, who are your personas and what data do they need access to, right? But it is awesome that you can segment it that way.
Oh, 100%. I mean, and I think if we look at because what does GTO ultimately want to know? They probably want to do some roll-up analytics. So
Yeah.
what do you think is that next step if you were the enterprise architect, Tom? What's that roll-up analytics look like, given everything we've talked about?
So I think we've got a couple things that we're going to want to do here, right? So for roll-up analytics, probably the best thing to do is going to be to add a, let's say it's Tableau, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to send some data from Data Cloud to Tableau to do our roll-up analytics and visualizations, anything else, right? And let me move this so it's all on the screen. There we go. And but also, I mean, there's nothing stopping us. So, like we said, there is some data in the Salesforce org that we didn't want to send to Data Cloud because of compliance reasons. Like, there's no reason we can't also be doing analytics locally in that org, right? So there's no reason we can't just do this. And actually, honestly, we can do this and just use native Salesforce reporting for things that we don't necessarily need to do roll-ups for. But
Correct.
But I think this is the way that I would look at this.
100%. And depending on who those users are of those Tableau dashboards, right? You can have Tableau gear into specific data spaces, right? So if you have a group that needs to gain access to one specific set of data in order to do that roll-up analytics, they can tap into that specific data space. And then if you have another group who wants to tap into a different data space, this is where you control a lot of access and a lot of privileges. And when you're actually doing your overall data cloud strategy, you want to make sure that all of this stuff is thought through. It's part of, trust is our number one value. We say that a lot, but this is really important for organizations that need to be able to operate in a unified way, right? They're driving their business based on this. You have different lines of business. You want to make sure that different personas and different users have the data that's relevant to them, and then other users have the data that's not relevant to them, right? And so you can control a lot of that through Data Cloud and with a lot of the use cases and investments that we've made.
I have a link to our template gallery that has got a bunch of data models that are associated with Data Cloud.
We've gone through a lot. So what would you do to sum up what we've kind of discussed today?
So let's see. So we have talked about what actually Hyperforce is and some of the underlying functionality and how all the different functional domains tie together. We talked about how Data Cloud is on Hyperforce. We talked about an org strategy for a company that acquires another company, and we've got two orgs in two different regions with two different sets of data residency requirements. We talked about connectors between Data Cloud and when to use a connector versus when to use middleware. And
right.
Let's see, we covered the whole idea of data streams and how data actually gets into Data Cloud, filtering, having the data end up where it lands when it gets into Data Cloud. So that's a data lake object, our data model objects, and then we talked about segregating that data using data space. So that's a lot to cover.
But there's this other thing. Just remember, I think we got a question earlier. It was about, hey, what is going to go on with different workloads? So let's remember, Solsun has also done the upgrade from Salesforce in Japan to Salesforce in Korea, and then can take on customer case management, which we also have specific sensitivity on. So that's a lot in this 40-minute session.
Yes, it is. And I know I feel like any one of these topics could almost be its own session. But one of the things I loved about this discussion is a lot of this is really new, and a lot of people are still trying to figure out what is even the right approach to take for something like this. And I know we can definitely do some follow-up sessions where we go deeper into some of these topics, but wanted to make sure everybody got an overview of how should I even really be thinking about this, and how should I even be approaching this.
And if I'll close by saying, this is one that we've heard a lot from the field is really, really important for us to be able to address. And I'm just very excited to kind of put this in the hands of everyone on this call, all of our Salesforce architects who really are strong advocates to help us get better and to help us know when we're doing things right. So at least my side, for myself, I would love the feedback. I love to connect with you all through this channel and continue to deliver not only new features and new capabilities in order for you to grow your business and support your customers, but also to just support the community overall. So thank you everyone for the chance to be here. Thank you, Tom, for giving me the space to kind of be the first person to kick off the Architect Academy on this new channel.
This was great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here, and yeah, thanks for all the great information, and thanks to everybody for joining us.